Leo had always believed that life was about certainty. Plans, stability, control, those were the things that kept the world from crumbling beneath his feet. He had spent years building a predictable, structured life, a stable job in finance, a meticulously planned future, and an unwavering routine that left no room for surprises. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It started with a phone call. A distant relative, an aunt he had barely known, had left him something in her will. An old, abandoned cabin in the middle of the mountains. It wasn't a grand inheritance, just a weathered wooden structure surrounded by endless wilderness. Leo had no interest in it. He barely remembered visiting her as a child. Yet, something about the unexpected nature of it gnawed at him. For reasons he couldn't explain, he packed his bags and drove 6 hours to see it for himself. The cabin was worse than he expected. Cobwebs covered the ceiling, dust thick enough to coat his shoes, windows that barely let in light. But there was something else, something about the silence, the untouched beauty of the wilderness, that made him pause. The first night, the loneliness was unbearable. He nearly left. But in the morning, with sunlight streaming through the broken window panes, he decided to stay a little longer. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the city began to feel like a distant memory. He fixed what he could, repaired the door, patched the leaking roof, even cleared a space outside for a small fire pit. The cabin, in its own way, began to feel less like a burden and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. One day, while clearing out an old chest, he found a collection of handwritten letters. They were from his aunt, written but never sent. Letters about her struggles, her dreams, her longing for connection. She had lived here, alone in the quiet. And yet, her words were filled with warmth, hope, and a desire to be remembered. Leo realized then that he had spent so much of his life trying to control everything, he had never stopped to listen. Not to the world, not to the people around him, and certainly not to himself. So, he did something unthinkable. He quit his job, sold his apartment, and decided to stay. He turned the cabin into something new. A refuge. A place where people, weary from their own struggles, could come to find peace. He invited others in, travelers, artists, people looking for something they couldn't quite name. And in giving them a place to belong, he found something he had been missing all along. For the first time in his life, Leo wasn't living by a plan. He was simply living. As the months passed, the cabin transformed. He added shelves filled with books, a garden where visitors could plant their own herbs, and a long wooden table where meals were shared under the glow of lanterns. The once abandoned cabin became a sanctuary, not just for Leo but for anyone who needed a pause from the world. One evening, a woman named Claire arrived. She had been driving aimlessly, running from a life that no longer felt like hers. She had no plan, no destination, just the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Leo welcomed her in without question, offering her a warm meal and a quiet place to rest. Over the following days, Claire opened up about her life. A demanding career, a relationship that left her empty, a feeling that she had lost herself along the way. Leo listened, understanding more than she realized. And as she helped tend the garden, as she sat by the fire with a cup of tea in hand, she too felt something shift. She decided to stay a little longer. Just like Leo had. Word spread about the cabin. More travelers arrived, each carrying their own stories. Some stayed for a night, some for months. Each left something behind. A book, a note, a piece of themselves woven into the very fabric of the place. Leo found joy in the connections, in the simple act of existing alongside others without the need for rigid expectations. One day, as he sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he thought back to his old life. The suits, the meetings, the relentless chase for security. It all felt like a distant dream, a version of himself he no longer recognized. He smiled, knowing that the cabin had given him more than just a place to stay. It had given him freedom. It had given him purpose. And for the first time, Leo understood that the greatest adventures aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones we let find us.